Hi everyone. In this video, I wanted to introduce your second writing project, the community-based argument. So after your first project, the rhetorical analysis, where you're thinking about analyzing the arguments made by others, now you have an opportunity to start making an argument of your own. Now, the community-based argument is a particular type of argument in that you are thinking about ultimately an argument to inform an audience. So this doesn't mean that you're making a proposal here. So you're not arguing ultimately for a course of action or anything like that. Instead, you're thinking about an audience who is either resistant to an idea or uninformed about an idea, and thinking about how to kind of let them know more about the topic and what's important and what ideas, concepts, threads, parties involved are really kind of at the heart of this conversation that you're getting into. So you're thinking about this, and the title community-based argument means that you're thinking about this argument within a specific community. Now, community here doesn't need to be necessarily geographical. It can be, absolutely. And a lot of students do take topics that are thinking about issues at the local, regional, or state level. But you don't have to go that route. You can also think about communities in terms of organizations and groups, whether nonprofit groups, churches, community service organizations, things like the Humane Society. You can also think about communities in terms of digital terms, like online communities, such as groups on Facebook or Twitter, and issues that are prevalent there. So there's a lot of different ways to think about community, and that's something you want to think about first. This does need to be an issue that's affecting a group at the no higher than kind of the state level, and that's not because the issue can't be something that's important nationally, but you're thinking about talking to a particular audience and a particular group of people. Also, geographic wise, it doesn't have to be Kansas related by any means. If you're from another state, another town, a city in another state, something like that, or another country, these are all options. You could think about issues happening there as well. It doesn't have to be located in Kansas in particular. But you need to think about that community, because that's going to help you think about what the issue is, who your audience is, and ultimately what you need to inform them about regarding this issue. So one of the things you'll be doing first with your research for this paper is figuring out what your audience does and does not know about the topic. So that's really important, because you need to say, if somebody knows nothing about the issue, you've obviously kind of got to lay some important groundwork. But if they know stuff about the issue and they're just, they might be a resistant audience, they might be kind of against your initial argument. So you got to think about where they're coming from and how to really position your argument to reach out to them and engage in them in particular ways. So on top of this, you're really highlighting the complex nature of the issue you're talking about. It's really easy to think about something as just black and white, you're for or against, or it's just all good or bad. But in reality, there's usually different groups involved, different reasons that they are for or against something. And so you're really kind of thinking about this whole relationship between these different groups, these different perspectives, these different views, and how they all come together to kind of shape this issue. So you might think about, like, let's say an example I often use is back in my hometown in Virginia, there was an argument for a Walmart to be placed right by a flood plain by a river in my town. And so, not surprisingly, this angered a lot of people, because not only was it on a floodplain, it was right across from an elementary school. It was in an area that already had problems with traffic. So there were people who were against it for various reasons. They didn't want more kind of foot traffic and people nearby the school. It would create environmental issues with pollution in the river, the possibility of flooding, and insurance issues. There's already a lot of kind of traffic going in and over these bridges and these streets near the location. And so people didn't want to see even more traffic congesting the area. Local businesses obviously were often against this, because it meant competition and possibly losing jobs or having to close down. But people were for it too, because it did mean more jobs for the community. It meant maybe cheaper options on groceries and things like that. So there were, there are all these different groups that are kind of coming together on this issue. And so ultimately the decision was made not to build there, but to build a couple miles away. The Walmart exists now and has been open for quite some time. But so you're thinking about an issue kind of like this. So maybe something is proposed, or maybe there's a thing going on right now somewhere that a lot of different groups are invested in. So your job in this paper is to kind of break down those different groups, those different views and perspectives, and think about what is at stake here and why does it matter. So at the end of the paper and your conclusion, you might make a general call and say, we need to do something about this, or it might be, here's the direction. But you're not really doing that in this paper. The goal of your paper is going to say, here's who is involved, what they're saying, and why this is a complex issue. So you notice on the assignment sheet, what's in italics is that you want to inform your audience why the issue needs to be addressed and why it exists or persists, and convince them how they should understand or interpret this issue. So though you're not arguing for a proposal for a course of action, you are arguing for a particular view or understanding of a topic. So now what to do, what not to do for this assignment. So the argument needs to stay specific and focused because it's really easy to get broad and go off topic really quick. And you want to think about staying focused because your job is to inform this audience about the issue. Again, remember, you're not proposing a solution here, but instead, informing the audience. One of the big things is that you're going to be using a lot of outside research in this paper. And so you want to make sure you're using it to support your claim. So the argument should be yours. You should still be kind of the expert here and really give us an insight to your topic and what's going on. And you want to show us through your sources that you have information, data, and research that supports your claim. So you shouldn't be you want to use your sources, but you don't really want, for this paper, lengthy or block quotes at this point. If you think there is a real reason to use one in this paper, I would suggest talking to me about it first. It's something we'll look at more and how to use kind of longer quotes in the third paper, the scholarly argument. But here, you want your sources to back up your claims, but you still want your voice to be really prominent throughout. In terms of the sources themselves, they need to be current and up to date. They need to be varied, different views, different perspectives, different types of sources. So newspapers, magazines, websites, kind of varying it up, academic articles. And they also need to be relevant to your argument. That's one of the things you'll be working on. It's real easy to kind of do an initial search and find titles that seem like they're going to relate to your argument and find that the source actually has nothing to do with what you're talking about. But one of the big things is at no point should your sources be carrying the paper. So this isn't a report of all the sources you found and all the information. This is your argument, and you want to use those sources to support your claims and not carry the argument. So in terms of finding sources for this paper, you're going to be using 5 to 7 credible sources to use as support. So these sources need to be informative and or persuasive. They can be both. They should be current, as I mentioned, which means published within the past 1 to 2 years, and relevant and tied to what you're talking about. One source can come from primary research if there's an opportunity for you to do so. So if there's somebody you can interview, a survey you can conduct, a questionnaire that makes sense for the project, you can definitely use that as a source. But that can only count as one of your sources. So even if you have 2 interviews, it only counts as one source. Some of your other sources can be from what we would call more kind of popular sources, magazines, newspapers, websites, things like that, as long as you deem them credible, which means you know where the information is coming from, you know who's writing it, you know that it's backed up, and it's not just kind of people saying ideas without any support. At least one source for this paper needs to be a scholarly article from a book or journal on the topic. Now, as is often the case with scholarly writing, depending on how recent your topic it is, there may not yet be people writing on it. So you might need to think more broadly about the issue. So maybe you're looking at educational funding in Kansas. There may or may not be a scholarly article on the issue, particularly in Kansas, especially for 2018. But maybe there is one that shows trends more historically, or maybe an article that talks about educational funding in a state comparable to Kansas. So in terms of that scholarly source, you definitely want to think about maybe going a little more broad in its scope. I'm glad to help out with that. You should use the Maybe Library databases. Academic Search Complete is often the best one that I recommend for this project, but not the only one. And don't forget that you can contact a librarian at Maybe either online or go to the library, and they are there to help you find sources if you're having trouble. So if you have questions about whether a source is scholarly or whether it works for the paper or not, feel free to let me know. I'm going to be briefly looking over a collection of sources for this paper. That's one of the requirements. So I will give you some feedback, but feel free to kind of touch base with me if you have any questions about an initial source. Now, in terms of selecting a topic, there are some guidelines here. It is pretty broad. And, again, I want you to pick something you're interested in some way, because it always makes the paper better if you're invested in the topic. It does need to be a current issue. So if it's something that's long done, already been solved, no longer is relevant, it's not going to work for this paper. It needs to be kind of something that's still ongoing. I already mentioned the topic needs to be local or state level in scale. And again, this is for reasons to keep you focused in the paper. It doesn't mean it can't be an issue that affects people on a national or even a global level, but you're thinking about this issue in a particular state or local context, in a particular community. You cannot pick hot button issues, which includes but is not limited to things like abortion, capital punishment, gun control, the drinking age, legalizing marijuana, immigration, gay marriage, and teen pregnancy. This doesn't mean if you have a topic that kind of touches on this, that doesn't mean it's necessarily not going to work. So I've had students write about the concealed carry policy on Kansas campuses, so such as at Washburn or somewhere else. And that is a particular conversation that I think works for this paper. But just talking broadly about kind of questions of gun control or the drinking age, these are topics that have been talked about time and again, and there's nothing particular you're going to add that's new to them. So if you have questions, or if there's an angle you're thinking about the issue that might work for the paper, do contact me ahead of time. Again, I'll be approving topics to make sure you're on the right track and let you know if you need to tweak things. So you want to kind of avoid those general hot button issues. And then the topic itself needs to be focused and specific. And that's kind of one of the key things. This goes back to the community, thinking about it at the local or state level. And that's so you have a manageable topic for this paper. So, for example, as I use on the assignment sheet, cyberbullying is broad. It's incredibly broad. It affects a number of platforms, a number of sites, thousands and maybe hundreds of thousands of people. And so that's going to be a book. So you want to think about how to narrow it down. So something like the issue of free speech on Twitter or on Reddit is more manageable. That's still probably pretty big, but it's a good starting point for your paper. So as with anything, if you have questions about whether it's focused or not, or you need to get more specific, just let me know. My goal here is to help you out and make sure your topic works for this paper. Again, once your topic has to be approved. Now for this paper, once your topic is approved, you really need to stick to it. So it's probably good to kind of start doing just a little bit of initial research to kind of find that there's stuff out there to talk about. And if you have questions, if you're not sure, like I said, contact me ahead of time. So think about the audience. I mentioned this again, but there's just a little kind of breakdown here on the assignment sheet. Think about who that particular group is. It's good to mention that in your topic paragraph and say, this is the area, the community, whatever it is that you're going to be thinking about, and who it is you're going to be informing. So on the assignment sheet, you can look at those outcomes, but really this is kind of a combination of making your own argument, really crafting that, and thinking about how to start using research to support claims, to provide evidence and to back up your ideas, and thinking about how to write to particular audiences. So you can be, this comes up some, you can use first person in this paper, but you still want to do so selectively. So every sentence shouldn't be I think or I believe, because in part, if you say I think this or I believe this, or I think this might be the case, that seems like you're hedging your bets. And a lot of times you can still drop the I think, I believe, and just make that statement, have that statement stand. People are going to know this is your voice and your argument. However, if you have a personal investment, a personal experience that speaks to the issue, you're from this area, you've experienced it, those are really great tools to bring in because it helps bring in another angle for the issue. So you can use first person, but definitely think about how and when to use it effectively. I still say usually avoid using second person, so don't really say you a lot. This might be useful in the introduction or conclusion to get people into the topic, but beyond that, you don't want to be talking at the reader necessarily. So you want to think about that. In terms of the length, this is the same length as the rhetorical analysis. So a minimum of 1,500 words in the body of the paper, max of 2,000 words. Again, word count does not include header, title. The works cited page for this paper doesn't count. None of that counts towards your word count. It's just what's in the body of the paper. So same formatting stuff, double space, 1-inch margins, 12-point Times New Roman font, or Calibri font, it's fine. MLA formatting. Now here it's important you have the correct in-text citations for all your sources and a complete works cited page for all of the outside sources. And the paper or the sources should be listed in both places, both on the works cited page and cited in the body of the paper. What I'm looking at when I grade this is, does your argument fully inform the audience on the complexity of your issue? So is it kind of clear why there's all these complex factors, these different groups involved, things like that? Is it well written and organized? Does it make sense? Do points flow from one to the next? Do we understand how the argument builds? There's research and evidence to support your claims throughout the paper, so we know and kind of understand where your argument's coming from and why we should be invested in it. And then do you address potential counter arguments or alternative hypotheses? So if people are against you, what and why are you saying we should see it this way and not the way they argue it? So there's 1 or 2 extra elements for this project. The deadlines are up on D2L, so I definitely recommend kind of making sure they're on the assignments. You should check out those deadlines. But so you'll have a topic paragraph that's worth 10 points, proposing what you want to talk about for this assignment. So that's going to be due fairly soon. So you want to be thinking about that topic. And then the next thing we're going to be submitting is an evaluative source. So this is a list of at least 5 sources you're going to be using for the paper. Now, when you submit it, you are not locked into these sources. So if you come up with this list and find that you still have or that 1 or 2 sources doesn't work, you need to replace them as you start working on the actual paper, that's fine. That's part of the writing process. But you don't want to have a set of sources to start building on. And that evaluative part of the source list is going to be thinking about what sources you found, what perspectives do they represent, why are they credible. So it's going to be kind of a short write-up saying, here's why I think I've got a good body of research to start writing the paper. As with the rhetorical analysis, you will have a full draft due for the community-based argument. And so make sure, when we're at that point, you're working on that, you have a full draft, because if you don't have a full draft, you will not be able to participate in the peer review and get the points there. And then on the final draft, as with the first paper, there's most heavily 50 points or content, 10 points each towards organization and MLA formatting. And the MLA formatting here, especially the in-text citation, the works cited, there's going to be more attention paid to that, more attention than I'm paying to that when grading your paper. So you really want to make sure you're doing that well. Use your textbook, use the Purdue OWL as resources to make sure those citations are good and done correctly. And then again, 5 points for grammar mechanics. So that's the breakdown. As always, if you have questions, feel free to send me an email and let me know. I'm always glad to talk about topics, sources, any of that kind of stuff. That's what I'm here for. And don't underestimate or forget that you have the library, and you can contact librarians both online and in Maybe Library in terms of finding sources, questions about kind of building an argument, things like that. So again, if you have any questions, send them my way, and I'm looking forward to seeing the topics you all choose to write on for this next paper.